Nobody tells you that the night before your wedding is the loneliest night of your life. They tell you about the nerves. They mention the excitement. Your buddies crack jokes. Your mother cries into a dish towel. Everyone has something to say about the big day. Nobody tells you that you'll lie in your hotel room at 10:30 on a Friday night in Charlotte, North Carolina, staring at the popcorn ceiling, and feel something that doesn't have a proper name. Somewhere between joy and dread, and closer to dread than you'd like to admit. My name is Michael Bradley. I was 30 years old. I was a detective with the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department. 3 years on the job, and I thought I had seen enough of the world to know when something was wrong. I was wrong about that too. Her name was Janet Bush, 26 years old, a graphic designer who worked for a mid-size marketing firm in uptown Charlotte, off East Trade Street. She had this way of tilting her head when she was concentrating on something, just slightly to the left, and the first time I noticed it, I was gone. Done. That was it for me. We met in February 2023 at a birthday party for my old academy buddy, Phil Jackson, over at his place in the Dilworth neighborhood. A split level on East Boulevard, 3 blocks from the old Harris Teeter. Phil had his backyard strung with lights, a cooler full of beer, and enough of his wife Linda's potato salad to feed a small country. I was standing near the back fence, holding a cup I hadn't touched, when Janet walked over and said, without any introduction whatsoever, "You look like someone who's doing math in your head at a party. That's either very impressive or very sad." I looked at her. "What's the math? You tell me." I laughed. And that was it. We dated for 14 months. 14 months of dinners at Pizzeria Blaze on South Boulevard, of Saturday mornings at Freedom Park, of her falling asleep on my couch with her legs tucked under her, and a design brief on her laptop and a half-eaten bag of pretzels beside her. 14 months of her laughing too loud at bad movies and being completely unapologetic about it. 14 months of me knowing in the way you know things you can't quite explain, that this was the person. I proposed on April 12, 2024 on the overlook at Crowder's Mountain State Park, about 35 miles west of Charlotte. We hiked to the top in the morning. She thought we were just going for a walk. She was wearing old sneakers and a windbreaker and no makeup, and she was more beautiful than I had words for. I got down on one knee. She covered her mouth with both hands. She said yes before I finished the sentence. We set the date for June 14th, 2025, a Saturday. 14 months of dating, and now 14 months of engagement. I liked the symmetry of it, even if I never told her that. The venue was the Ballantine Hotel, South Charlotte. 120 guests. Her mother, Patricia Bush, had been planning the centerpieces since approximately 5 minutes after I proposed. By the time June 13th arrived, the Friday night before the wedding, everything was in place. The suit was pressed and hanging in the closet of my hotel room at the Westin Charlotte on West Trade Street. The rings were with Phil, who was my best man and would sooner lose a limb than lose those rings. The rehearsal dinner had gone smoothly at Sullivan's Steakhouse in South Park. I'd shaken hands and made toasts and smiled until my face ached. And then I was alone in my hotel room at 10:30 at night, and something was pulling at me. I want to be clear, it wasn't doubt. Not about Janet. I was certain about her. It was something else. A detective's instinct, maybe, or just the feeling that something had been slightly off for weeks, and I hadn't given it the attention it deserved. Little things. A conversation she'd cut short. A moment where she'd looked at me with something in her eyes that wasn't quite happiness and wasn't quite sadness. Something in between. Something unresolved. I'd chalked it up to pre-wedding stress. I'd told myself I was overreading. But you're a detective, Michael. You don't overread. That's the whole job. I got up. I put on my jacket. I told myself I was just going to drive past her parents' house, a 15-minute drive from the Westin over to the Myers Park neighborhood, the house on Hermitage Court where Janet had grown up and where she and her mother were spending the night before the wedding. The old tradition. I wasn't going to knock. I just needed to, I don't know, be closer to her, feel less like I was waiting for something I couldn't name. I drove the route I knew by heart down South Tryon, turned onto Queens Road, then into the quiet residential pocket of Myers Park. The Bush house was a 2-story colonial on Hermitage Court, wide front porch, black shutters. A dogwood tree in the front yard that Patricia Bush watered like it was a member of the family. The lights in the living room were on. The lights upstairs, in the room that had been Janet's bedroom growing up, were on too. I parked on the street. I sat in the car for a moment. Just go home, Michael. You'll see her tomorrow. I almost did. I had the engine running. And then I was walking up the porch steps, quietly because it was late, because I didn't want to alarm anyone, because I was just going to knock softly, see if she was still awake, tell her I loved her and drive back to the hotel. I never knocked. I was 3 feet from the door when I heard her voice. And then her mother's. And then her father's, Gary Bush, a man I respected enormously, a retired high school principal who coached Little League on Saturdays and made the best smoked ribs in Charlotte. His voice was low, serious in a way I had never heard from him. I stood on that porch, and I did not move. What I heard through that door, I need to take a breath before I tell you this part. Janet was crying, not the quiet kind, the kind that comes from somewhere deep, the kind that's been held for too long and finally breaks the surface. Her mother was saying, "Baby, you have to tell him. You have to. You cannot carry this into a marriage." And Janet said, through the tears, "Mom, I can't. I'll lose him. He'll think I'm damaged. He'll leave." Janet, Mom, I've been trying to figure out how to say this for 4 months. I don't know how to say it. Her father's voice, careful and steady. You say it the way you said it to us. You sit down with him and you tell him the truth. He deserves the truth, sweetheart. He's a cop, Dad. He thinks about things a certain way. He's going to think about who and how and why, and he's going to look at me differently. I know he will. You don't know that. I do. I do know that. I didn't breathe. I was standing on a porch in Myers Park, and I was not breathing. And then Janet said, quiet as a thread, "What happened to me? What that man did to me? It wasn't my fault. I know that. I know that. But the thing he gave me, I have to live with it. Every single day. And now Michael has to know about it. And he might not want me anymore. And I don't know how to." She stopped. She couldn't finish it. Her mother said softly, "The doctor says it can be managed. It doesn't have to define your life. It already has. For 18 months it already has." I sat down on the porch step. I'm not sure I made a decision. Exactly. My legs just stopped working and I sat down. And I stayed there for what felt like a very long time. And I listened to the woman I was going to marry cry on the other side of a door about something that had been done to her. To her. Not by her. That she had been carrying entirely alone. I need to stop here for just a moment, because I want to be honest with you about where my head went in those first few minutes on that porch. It went to anger. Not at her. At whoever had done this to her. A clean, cold, professional fury that I recognized from the job. The kind that doesn't scream. The kind that files things away and moves with purpose. I had heard enough in those fragments to understand the shape of what had happened. Someone had forced himself on her. She'd been infected with herpes simplex virus, HSV. As a result, she had been living with the medical reality and the psychological weight of it for over a year and a half, while building a life with me, and planning a wedding and smiling through rehearsal dinners and never saying a word. Why hadn't she told me? Because she was terrified. I heard exactly why. She was terrified I would look at her differently, that I would see the crime committed against her and mistake it for something about her character. That I would leave. That thought, that she had lived with that fear for 18 months, that hit harder than anything else that night. Welcome back to Sweet Family Revenge. Grab your snacks, get comfortable, and remember, the people in these stories had every chance to behave themselves. They just chose wrong. Drop a comment and be sure to subscribe. You're going to love it here. I did not knock on that door. I walked back to my car. I sat inside it for 20 minutes, and then I drove back to the Westin, went up to my room, sat on the edge of the bed, and stared at nothing. I did not sleep. By the time morning light started coming through the curtains, I had made 2 decisions. The first, I was not going to pretend I hadn't heard what I heard. The second, I was not going to let her walk down an aisle carrying that weight alone for one more day. The morning of June 14th, 2025, arrived like mornings do. indifferent to your condition, fully committed to its own schedule. My phone lit up at 7:15 with a text from Phil. "You alive over there?" I typed back. "Barely. Need to talk to Janet before the ceremony. Private." 3 dots. Then, "Michael, that's not... The whole thing starts at 2. Hair and makeup's already..." "Phil, I need to talk to her." A pause. Then, "I'll make it happen." By 9 o'clock, I was in Patricia Bush's kitchen on Hermitage Court. Patricia had made coffee without asking, and set a mug in front of me and sat down across the table like a woman who had been waiting for this conversation and was not entirely sure she was ready for it. Gary Bush stood by the window, arms folded, watching me with a look I couldn't fully read, something between respect and worry. I'm going to be honest, this was the hardest conversation I have ever navigated, and I've delivered death notifications for a living. Janet came downstairs in a robe, her hair pinned up loosely, no makeup. She looked at my face and she knew immediately. The color went out of her. "Michael, sit down, Danny." She sat. She looked at her hands. I did not waste time. I came by last night. I was on the porch. I heard the conversation. The silence that filled that kitchen was enormous. Her mother closed her eyes. Her father didn't move. Janet looked up at me. Her eyes were already filling. "How much did you hear?" "Enough." She nodded slowly. One tear slid down her face and she didn't wipe it away. "So now you know." "I know part of it. I want you to tell me the rest. Not because I'm a cop, because I'm the man who's supposed to marry you in 5 hours, and I want to hear it from you." She breathed, steadied herself, and then in a low, careful voice, she told me everything. It had happened in November 2023. She had been living alone in her apartment on the 4th floor of a building on East 7th Street, in the No-Dan neighborhood. She'd come home late from a work event, a client dinner in Uptown, and taken the elevator up. The building's exterior door had a lock that the management company had been slow to repair. Residents had complained about it for months. A man was in the elevator when it opened. She didn't know him. She'd never seen him before. What happened next? She told me plainly, without details I didn't need, in the way that someone tells a thing they have rehearsed in therapy and told to very few people. She was attacked. In the elevator. The man fled. She called 911 from inside her apartment. She was transported to Carolina's Medical Center. She gave a statement that night. The report was filed. The case was assigned to the CMPD's Special Victims Unit. There was a detective assigned, but the case had gone cold. The man had not been identified. 3 months later, in February 2024, the same month we met, her gynecologist told her that she had tested positive for HSV-2, herpes simplex virus type 2. The forensic medical evidence from her assault examination had indicated potential exposure. The follow-up test confirmed it. She was 26 years old, and she was sitting in a doctor's office being told that a crime committed against her in an elevator had left a permanent mark on her body that she would manage for the rest of her life. Herpes simplex virus type 2 is a lifelong condition. It cannot be cured. It can be effectively managed with antiviral medication, acyclovir, valacyclovir, that reduces both the frequency of outbreaks and the risk of transmission to partners. With proper treatment and precautions, many people with HSV-2 live full, intimate, healthy lives. The stigma around the virus far exceeds its medical severity in most cases. But the stigma is real, and it is heavy, and it had been sitting on Janet Bush's chest every single day since that February afternoon, in a doctor's office. She met me at Phil's party 3 weeks later, and she said she thought about telling me from the very beginning. And then she didn't, because it was too soon. And then she didn't because things were moving fast. And then she didn't, because she was afraid. And then I proposed on a mountaintop, and she said yes before she finished thinking, because she loved me and she was terrified and she wanted a life with me more than she had wanted anything. And then the months passed, and the wedding got closer, and the things she hadn't said grew larger. And by the Friday night before our wedding, she was in her childhood home crying to her parents, because she didn't know how to say it, and couldn't imagine living without me if she did. She finished. She looked at me. I looked back at her for a long moment. "Who was the detective assigned to your case?" She blinked. "What?" "The SVU detective. The one working your assault case. Who was it? A. Detective Karen Sims. But the case went cold, Michael. It's been over a year. What's the case number? She stared at me. That's the first thing you want to know? Danny. I reached across the table and took both her hands. I'm going to ask you some questions in a minute that are different. But right now, I need that case number. Because if there is a man in this city who did what he did to you, and he's still out there, that ends. Today. That is not a request. That is a promise. She started crying again. Her mother pressed a hand over her mouth. Her father crossed the room, sat down and put his hand on my shoulder. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. We talked for 2 hours. I asked her the questions I needed to ask, not as a detective, as her person. Had she been seeing a therapist? Yes. Since March 2024, a trauma-focused therapist named Dr. Angela Houston at a practice on Providence Road. Was she on medication? Yes. Valacyclovir, prescribed by her OBGYN. Was she doing okay? She looked at me like that was the strangest and most welcome question she had ever been asked. I'm terrified, she said. I'm sitting here in a robe on my wedding day, telling the man I love something I've been afraid to say for a year and a half. I don't know if I'm okay. I don't know what happens now. I looked at her for a moment. What happens now is I go back to the hotel and I put on my suit. And at 2 o'clock this afternoon, you walk down an aisle at the Ballantine Hotel. And I'll be standing at the end of it. She went completely still. You still want to? I was on a mountain last April, and I asked you to marry me because I knew. I still know. Whatever happened to you before I met you doesn't change what I know. She put her face in her hands and cried in a way that was entirely different from the crying I'd heard through the door the night before. That had been fear. This was something releasing. I let her cry. I held her hands. And then I made very clear, gently but unmistakably, that this was not the end of the conversation. That there were things we needed to talk through properly, with time and care, with her doctor and her therapist involved, with full honesty between us going forward. That a marriage couldn't be built on a secret this size, and that starting today, there would be no more secrets of any size. She nodded. I know. I should have told you so much sooner. I was just so afraid of losing you. You're not going to lose me. But Danny, you have to trust me with the hard things. That's literally what I'm here for. Her father made a sound that might have been a laugh or might have been him clearing his throat very aggressively. I chose not to investigate. I drove back to the Westin. I called Phil from the car. Is the wedding still on? He asked immediately. It's still on, but I need you to do something for me this afternoon before the ceremony. Name it. Look up a CMPD SVU case for me, Detective Karen Sims. I'll text you the case number. Long pause. Michael. Phil. Yeah, okay. The ceremony was at 2 o'clock. The Ballantine Hotel's Grand Ballroom, South Charlotte. 120 guests. Patricia Bush's centerpieces looking exactly as she had envisioned them. The string quartet played Pachelbel's Canon in D as Janet came down the aisle on her father's arm. She was wearing ivory lace. Her hair was up. She had been crying an hour ago and you would never have known it. When Gary placed her hand in mine, he held on for just a second longer than the ceremony required. I looked at him. He gave me a single small nod. I've got her, that nod said. I know, mine answered. The officiant, our pastor, Reverend James Nelson from the church in Ballantine where Janet's family had been members for 20 years, led us through vows that I had written myself and nearly didn't get through. Not because I was sad, because I meant every word so much that the words were almost too large to fit in my mouth. When he pronounced us husband and wife, Janet pressed her forehead against mine before I could kiss her. She whispered something I won't repeat here, because some things belong only to the two people who were there. Then she laughed. That too loud laugh that I had loved from the beginning. I kissed my wife. We did not go on our honeymoon immediately. The cruise we'd booked, 7 days, Nassau to Grand Cayman, departing out of the port of Charleston on June 16th, was postponed. Janet called the travel agent. I called my supervisor. Nobody asked too many questions. Phil, who knew the shape of things without knowing all the details, covered for me at work with the discretion of a man who understood loyalty. The reason we stayed, the case number Janet gave me. CMPD, case number 2023, SVU 4871. Assigned Detective Karen Sims, Charlotte Mecklenburg Police Department, Special Victims Unit based at the Law Enforcement Center on East 4th Street in Uptown Charlotte. I went in on Monday, June 16th, the day after my wedding, in civilian clothes, with my badge in my pocket and my wife's permission to do what I do. Karen Sims was a 14-year veteran of the department, a compact woman in her 40s with close-cut hair and reading glasses she kept on top of her head. She looked at me across her desk and said, "You're the husband." "I'm the husband. She told me you might come in. She called me this morning." "Then you know why I'm here." Karen opened a drawer and pulled out a file that was thicker than I expected. Case went cold in January 2024. Elevator surveillance footage from the building. The interior camera had been manually disabled approximately 48 hours before the incident. Whoever he was, he knew the building. I felt that settle in my chest. So, it wasn't random. Almost certainly not. But we had no DNA match in the database. No witnesses. The exterior door malfunctions had been reported by 12 different residents. The building management had essentially created an access vulnerability and ignored it. What about the building management? Staff? Anyone with keycard access who would know the camera situation? Karen looked at me over the edge of her glasses. "You want to consult, Bradley?" "I want to close this case." She held my gaze for a moment. Then she slid the file across the desk. "I will not walk you through every step of the investigation that followed, because some of it is still part of an active prosecutorial record, and because this isn't a police procedural. But I will tell you what happened plainly. The building on East 7th Street in Noda had contracted its maintenance through a property management company called Hargrove Residential Services, headquartered in Steel Creek. The company employed 23 maintenance and facilities personnel. Cross-referencing the keycard access logs, which the management company had initially claimed were not retained, but which their own IT vendor had archived, with staff schedules for the week of the incident produced 4 names. 2 were immediately cleared. 1 was on medical leave and had been out of state. The 4th was a man named Terry Booth, 34 years old, a maintenance supervisor who had serviced Janet's building on a rotating schedule for 2 years. He had keycard access to every floor. He had submitted a service request ticket for the elevator in Janet's building 11 days before the attack, a ticket that was closed as resolved, with no corresponding work order, which meant he'd used it as a pretext to document his presence in the system. He had disabled the elevator camera himself. His DNA was not in the national database because he had never been arrested. But when the SVU obtained a court-ordered DNA sample, executed by a warrant based on the keycard evidence, the ticket irregularities, and a tip from a former colleague who had reported concerning behavior to Hargrove's HR department in 2022 and been ignored, it was a match to the forensic evidence from Janet's examination at Carolina's Medical Center. Terry Booth was arrested on August 4, 2025, at his residence in the Steel Creek neighborhood of Charlotte by Detective Karen Sims and 3 other officers. I was not present for the arrest. I had been kept at arm's length from the final operational steps for legal reasons, which was correct procedure and which I respected. Barely. He was charged with first-degree forcible rape, breaking and entering, and criminal use of a destructive device for the disabled surveillance equipment. The Mecklenburg County District Attorney's Office, under DA Rebecca Harmon, filed the charges. Terry Booth's attorney entered a not guilty plea. He went to trial in February 2026. On February 19, 2026, after 11 hours of deliberation, a jury of 12 returned a unanimous guilty verdict on all counts. Terry Booth was sentenced to 22 to 28 years in the North Carolina State Prison System. Judge Patricia Holden of the Mecklenburg County Superior Court accepted the verdict and remanded him immediately. I was in that courtroom. I sat in the 3rd row, in a suit, next to my wife. Janet held my hand and did not make a sound when the verdict was read. Afterward, in the hallway outside courtroom 4150, she pressed her face against my shoulder and stayed there for a long time. I did not say anything. There wasn't anything to say that the moment hadn't already said. "I want to tell you where we are now," because that is where this story actually lives. Janet continues to see Dr. Angela Simon, her therapist, twice a month. She has described the therapy as the best investment I have ever made in myself, which is the kind of thing she says now with a directness she didn't used to have. She is on a daily antiviral regimen. She has read everything there is to read about HSV-2 management. She has connected, through an online support community, with other women who are navigating the same reality, some of them assault survivors, some not. She is not ashamed. She worked very hard to get to not ashamed, and she will tell you herself that it is ongoing work, but she is getting there. She told me once, after a particularly hard week, that the worst thing about what happened to her wasn't the physical reality. It was the silence she'd built around it. The way she'd convinced herself that the truth would cost her everything, when in fact the secret was the thing that had been costing her, every day, invisibly, in ways she hadn't fully measured. "I wish I had told you sooner," she said. "I wish you had too," I told her. "But I understand why you didn't. And I'm here now." That's the whole of it, really. There is one more thing I want to say, and this is the part where I step slightly outside the story and talk directly to you, because this channel is about more than watching people's lives unfold. Herpes simplex virus is the most common sexually transmitted infection in the United States. According to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, approximately 1 in 6 Americans between the ages of 14 and 49 has genital HSV. 2. A significantly larger number carry HSV-1, the oral strain, often contracted in childhood, which can also be transmitted genitally. The vast majority of people who carry the virus don't know it, because most cases are asymptomatic or produce symptoms mild enough to be dismissed as something else. The stigma around herpes is by any measurable standard wildly disproportionate to its medical impact for most people. It is a manageable chronic condition, not a death sentence, not a character judgment, not the end of intimacy or love or marriage. People with HSV-2 who take antiviral medication and practice responsible communication with partners live full, healthy, intimate lives. What Janet experienced, acquiring the virus as a result of a sexual assault, is not uncommon. HSV can be transmitted through any form of sexual contact, and assault survivors often carry the additional burden of managing a condition they acquired through no choice of their own. The silence around this is real. The shame is real. And it is worth saying clearly, the shame belongs to the perpetrator, not the survivor. Every single time. If you are a survivor carrying a secret like the one Janet carried, please talk to someone. A doctor, a therapist, a person who loves you. The weight of it alone is not something you have to carry. And the people who truly love you will not leave. I want to say that again. The people who truly love you will not leave. And if you are the person someone loves, and they come to you with something hard, be the kind of person they weren't afraid to tell. That's the whole job, really. In a marriage, in a friendship, in a life. We never did take that cruise to Nassau and Grand Cayman. We rescheduled it for October 2025, after the arrest, and went with the full 7 days. Janet wore a yellow sundress on the first day aboard and ate conch fritters off a street cart in Nassau, like she had been there 100 times. She told me that watching the water from the balcony of our cabin was the first time she had felt genuinely, unguardedly happy in years. I told her that was a high bar, and I intended to keep clearing it. She told me to stop being smooth. We are still working on that. My name is Michael Bradley. I am 31 years old. I am a detective with the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department and a husband in that order on my badge and in the opposite order in everything that matters. My wife is Janet Bradley, née Bush. She is 27 years old, and she is, without competition, the most courageous person I have ever known, in a job where I have known a great many courageous people. The dogwood tree in the front yard of the house on Hermitage Court is still there. Patricia Bush still waters it like a member of the family. The porch where I stood and heard everything, I've sat on those steps many times since. Janet thinks it's strange that I like it out there. I've never told her why. Some places become important to you in ways you can't entirely explain. That porch is where I made the decision to be the kind of man she deserved to marry. The rest has been trying to live up to it. If you liked this story, join our community by hitting that like button and subscribing for more family-centered accounts like this.